Hey, thanks for joining us here on YouTube. Most often asked question we get is how we trim our brisket. It's quite simple, so we've done a quick video for it. Make sure you pay attention to that. At the end, I'll give you how we do the cooking instructions on it. Cheers.
All right, everybody, here we go. I'm going to show you how I trim my brisket for backyard. This is, like I said, this is what I'm going to do to feed my family, friends, whatever the case may be. First thing I'm going to do, I'm not going to use my good knife, my trimming knife, to cut the back. Plastic is terrible on knives, so I'm going to just grab a different box cutter and I'm going to just cut a hole in that plastic, cut through it so that I can get my brisket out. Okay, now that's out. Pull up my knife. Today I'm going to be using my favorite knife, my Unita barbecue. This is I'm not sure if you call it boning knife, fillet knife. I'm really not that technical. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull off some of this big thick fat vein here. I'm going to go in nice and gently, just kind of work along a seam, let the fat tell me where the knife should go. This fat will not render off. So this is something you could keep if you want to reserve it aside to do tallow. That stuff's great. For today, unfortunately, as you can maybe hear, it goes in the garbage. Next thing I'm going to do while my knife is still at its sharpest point, I'm going to try and get any of this stuff off the top, any of this fat, silver skin. Seasoning will penetrate the meat, but it won't penetrate that kind of thing. So you want to kind of get as much of that off as you can. You don't want to gouge the meat, if at all possible. But we're just going to try to get as much of this silver skin and thin layer of fat off as we can. Now, like I said, the seasoning will not penetrate that. Some of it will kind of stick to it, because this will eventually be what we're cooking on top, so it will kind of nestle in. It'll find itself a home, but it's not going to get deep down into the meat, which is what we really want. So let's just try and take off a good chunk of it here. Like I said, without gouging the meat though. Got a little bit off, but we're going to come back to this later. Next thing I do, I go to the side here, and you can kind of see this bit of a flap. And we get this other thick vein of meat inside. I want to work in there, but what I want to do is just have my knife go back and forth. I want to create a pocket. This is going to help me define a mark that I want to use for when I'm trimming. So all I'm going to do, more or less, is just try to dig that out. Again, that stuff's not going to render. When you get those guys that like to squeeze the brisket and show you how juicy it is, this is what they're squeezing. They've done nothing fantastic. I mean, it might look cool for the gram, but in all honesty, it's just thick cuts of fat that's already in that meat. So what I want to do is I want to kind of find where the two muscles more or less interact, where they combine. So it looks to me like that's about there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out my knife, just make a cut across. That is where I figure the point and the flat meet. So what I want to do is on the point side, I want to take that right down to the meat. Just start taking a bit off at a time. See, I got a little bit of meat. It's not the end of the world on this side. This is the point side. There's a ton more marbling. In all honesty, I'm going to end up taking it right down to the meat. I don't want any surface fat, or at least as little as possible as I can on here. There's so much fat marbling throughout the point that it can protect itself. This will make more sense as we kind of get into this. said, to about that line, that's where we want to take off as much of this surface fat as possible. Now, you might be thinking, hey, it's a lot of my brisket I'm trimming off. It is, it's just fat. Keep it if you want, make some tallow, it's great. But realistically, you're not gonna be eating a bunch of this stuff anyways. And I mean, a lot of people like the flavor of fat, but not everybody likes to eat the actual fat. And there's plenty of fat within the marbling of this brisket. Okay, I've kind of got that taken away. I can see a little bit more of my brisket now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it back over. And this is where you can really see this fat seam in here. That's where we're going to work to separate our brisket. So I'm actually going to give this a quick turn. Hopefully this shows up a little bit better. Now I'm going to just gently, using the tip of my knife, go through that fat seam. Now, as you can probably see, there's a big chunk of fat down there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try and keep the majority of the fat on the flat side. Like I said, the point anyways, we want to take as much fat off as we can. So we're going to leave as much fat as we can on the flat to try to protect it. Now once I've got about 4 to 6 inches in, I'm actually going to flip it over, because then gravity can help me. It'll start to pull apart a bit. You can see even if you get a good grip, some of that stuff you could just tear. But now what I'm going to do is just using the tip of the blade, work myself around, and keep cutting through this. Now, it's always best to have as cold a brisket as you can. You don't want it to be frozen, but you want it to be cold. Once it starts to heat up, this fat gets really messy, and it's going to be really tough to work with. So you just kind of keep just using the tip of the blade to keep pulling it away. Just try to keep that line separating. All cold on the hands. Now we're just going to keep pulling it away bit by bit till voila, it separates. Okay, I'm going to put the point aside for now. Go back to the flat. Now, like I said, we want to keep some of this fat on to protect it, but as you feel around, you can see some of this stuff, this thicker stuff just isn't going to render. So we're going to pull some of that off. Now we're going to go over to here, where we got the thicker piece. We want to take off some of this almost cellulite stuff. The cellulite isn't going to render off, and like I said, our seasonings isn't going to penetrate through it. Now I'm trimming this, I'm cooking on a drum, so I've got a direct flame underneath, so I'm not overly worried always about some of that meat showing, because I have a water pan underneath here. What you can do though, is if you're cooking directly on a grate, keep some of these thin pieces. Then after we season it, we can almost make band-aids of sort to kind of protect that meat a bit if you need. So again, just keep working at this textured stuff. So we're going to keep trying to take off. Because it's not going to render, it's not going to have any real positive. Might get a little bit more of a jiggle on an Instagram video, but again, I'm more worried about making some good food for my friends and family than I am necessarily to be the next big Instagram star. On this side, not necessarily going to be the prettiest, but it'll damn sure taste good, that's for sure. With this, I want to just try and take a little bit of this stuff that hangs. I'm not a big fan of stuff that hangs. I feel there's a better chance of it burning. So even though it might burn and it might fall off, what is going to happen is that burn will affect some of the smoke areas. So if you get a little piece, you know, like this hanging piece here that burns, it might crisp up and fall off, but what it does, it creates a bitter smoke, and that might affect some of the meat all within this flavor. So that's why any of that hanging stuff I'm going to really try to take off. Okay, now that I've got this done, I'm going to come back to this side, and this is the side we're going to baby. Some of this stuff, I'm just, you know, that's not worth cooking. So I will take some of that off. I'll try and peel off a little bit of this. This fat, like I said, it's not gonna, the seasoning's not gonna come through it. So this is where you maybe want to take your time. Try and take off some of this stuff. These are the things that in competition barbecue will set you above a lot of other guys. You're cooking for at home, you still want the best. If you've got the time, you've got the patience, try and take some of this stuff off. Now, if you're a guy who makes sausages, you can be a little more liberal with taking it off. Some of that stuff, you know, you can throw it into some scraps, grind it up, make some sausage, make some ground beef brisket burgers. But to be honest with you, I'd be happy with cooking this. So I think that's where I'm gonna leave it today. Last thing I'm gonna do is I want to find which way my grain goes. As you can see, my grain kind of goes this way. So I'm gonna go to the end, and I'm gonna cut a little slit in it, kind of like a snake's tongue, but an inch long. What's gonna happen is now when I cook it, that'll kind of pronounce a little bit more. Number one, I'll get a little piece I can break off pitmaster snack, you know. You gotta do all the cooking, you're entitled to that. Give you a chance to know if you gotta add a little more butter, a little more salt, pepper, whatever the case is. Lastly, it's gonna give me a marking. Once this is done, like if you use a fine ground seasoning, it's gonna be tough to tell which way the grain goes. So this gives you a marking. That's what will be there. Now I know to come down with my knife against the grain, and I'm gonna have perfect slices every time. Okay, now that we've got our flat done, I'm gonna go back to the point here. The point, I'm doing this way because everybody I cook for, everybody tends to love burnt ends. So this is my way of making great burnt ends every time. Now some of this, you see by looking through, it wasn't worth trimming down to save that little bit of fat, or that little bit of meat, sorry. So now I'm going to try pulling, like I said, this is the point end. I want to have as much of the surface fat off as possible. There's so much fat inside this that the seasoning will, if you don't pull this off the outside, the seasoning won't stick, and then it's just not going to give you that good of a product. So I'm going to go over this side. This was the inside. So you can see all that squeeze out for Instagram fat that was left on the inside of it. So I'm going to try and get a bunch of that off. Like I said, if you've got a grinder, even a KitchenAid attachment, you know, you can run this through there. When you're using a more affordable type grinder, I would cut them into much smaller pieces. Brisket especially can be so tough that it can wreck a grinder. I've wrecked more than one KitchenAid before I learned that, hey, you gotta chop it into smaller pieces to grind it up. You're not gonna get that long strands, but once it gets into a burger, into a sausage, you're not gonna worry about that anyways. Okay. Unfortunately, I could sit and trim this thing forever, but we'll get down not much. So lastly, what we want to do is make it a uniform thickness. You can tell by this that this part is, over on this side, is way thicker than this. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to this side. Little piece of hanging off, we don't want that to burn. Where we got this thicker part, where it's kind of in, we want to put in our knife, and this is where it's nice. This is where I really like my Unity knife, because it's a long boning knife kind of style. I get in there to where it comes across. Now I'm going to gently fillet through it. Now I'm not going to go all the way through the end piece here. I want to get this like that. So now it's a much more uniform thickness. That way it's going to cook evenly throughout. I'm going to get that optimal tenderness through everything. I'm going to have some really killer burnt ends. And as I mentioned before, this is going to be the difference in 12-hour cook time versus 8-hour cook time. Now when I go to season this, I'll show you again here in a little bit, but I'm not going to hit it with as much seasoning as I would a whole brisket, because it doesn't have as much meat to go through. Okay, here we go. Like I said, we're going to season it. I'm not going to hit it with as much brisket, or sorry, as much seasoning as I would doing a whole one. Here we got our flat again. Let's start with our flat. So I always, just out of habit, like to season the fat side first. I think that side needs to take a little bit more. I'm going to do this into this container. A, I don't like the mess. B, I'm going to trim some more brisket on here, so I don't want to rack up all my seasoning onto the board. So now all I'm going to do, I want to give it a nice coat, but I'm not going to go too heavy. I'm going to go a little bit more on the fat side because I'm going to use some time and let that settle in. That's what I'm going to use for hitting my one side. We'll come back in a few minutes, I'll show you the other. Cheers. Man, I'm having trouble with this video camera today. So this is what I've got. That's about what we hit. A little bit more here on our flat side. We don't want to go too crazy because it's got a ton of salt and pepper in it. Now we're going to hit the point side. Get a little bit to come off there. Point side I'm going to hit a little bit more. So a lot of intramuscular, a lot of fat on the inside of it. It's going to render off. It's going to wash some of that off. So I want to just keep a little bit extra on there. Simple as that. Hit the smoker. We're going to get a nice 8 hours on the flat total with wrap, 9 on the point. But look below and you'll find all our instructions on that.
All right, your brisket is all trimmed up, ready to go. Very easy cooking process. Into the smoker, 225 goes, and after 4 hours, I'm going to wrap it. And what I want to do before I wrap though, I'm just going to go along, gently rub my finger along the seasoning, make sure the seasoning's stuck. If it's stuck, great, wrap it. If it's not, check on it again about a half hour, then wrap it. All said and done, at 4 hours after it's been wrapped, so 8 hours total cook time in the flat, that should be good to come off. Give it a probe. It doesn't matter what the number is. You just want to have it feeling like it's going into warm butter. The point, at this point, I will take and I cube into 1-inch pieces. I'll put it into a foil tin, add a liter of low sodium beef broth, put it back in the smoker for 1 hour. All that flat's going to need is 1 hour to rest. And because it is much smaller than the full packer brisket, it's not going to take as long. So you let that rest. After that hour, you can pull your brisket point out, your burnt ends, slice against the grain on your flat. You're going to have lots of happy people eating your brisket. If you've enjoyed the video, make sure you like and subscribe. We're going to be putting a lot more content up on YouTube. Don't forget to check us out on all your favorite socials. We'll see you again soon. Cheers.